Good evening. I'm Paulina Paboja, Chair and Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Art Institute, and it's my honor to welcome you. Today's conversation, Joan Mitchell at 100, 6 paintings from 6 decades between Sarah Roberts and Caitlin Haskell, will be an in-depth discussion that serves as the keynote address of the Joan Mitchell Centennial Symposium, a scholarly convening which will examine the career of one of the 20th century's most innovative abstract artists. The program will advance the critical thinking around Mitchell's work as curators, conservators, artists, and scholars present original research and share novel approaches to understanding Mitchell's many contributions and the context in which they arose. We are grateful for the cooperation of the Joan Mitchell Foundation for their investment in the museum's vision and this program especially. The foundation cultivates the study and appreciation of Mitchell's life and work while fulfilling her wish to provide resources and opportunities for visual artists. Through this, they affirm and amplify artists' essential contributions to society. I'd like to extend my thanks to Krista Blatchford, the Executive Director of the Foundation, and all of those at the Foundation whose support and partnership in planning the symposium and this conversation enabled us to be here now. So before we get started, I'd like to properly introduce this evening's discussants. Sarah Roberts joined the Joan Mitchell Foundation in June 2024 as Senior Director of Curatorial Affairs. Previously, she served as the Andrew W. Mellon Curator and Head of Painting and Sculpture at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where she organized exhibitions and directed research initiatives on the museum's permanent collection for 20 years. In 2021, she curated Joan Mitchell, a major retrospective organized with Katie Siegel and the Baltimore Museum of Art. For that exhibition, she also co-authored and co-edited the catalog. Her other exhibitions include Amy Sherald, American Sublime, which is touring right now, SF MoMA's presentation, Frank Bowling, The New York Years, and Robert Rauschenberg, Erasing the Rules. Caitlin Haskell serves as the Gary C. and Frances Comer Senior Curator in Modern and Contemporary Art and Director of Ray Johnson Collections and Research at the Art Institute of Chicago. An expert on the art and criticism of the historical avant-gardes, she joined the Art Institute in 2018. Haskell's recent exhibitions and catalogs include Frida Kahlo's Month in Paris, A Friendship with Mary Reynolds, Remedios Varo, Science Fictions, Cezanne, Ray Johnson, Care of, and Renee Magritte, The Fifth Season. Please join me in welcoming Sarah and Caitlin.
Okay, this is working? I think it is, great. So first of all, thank you, Paulina, for those great introductions. And thank you all for being here tonight. Sarah and I have worked together for over a decade, but this is our very first public conversation about Joan Mitchell, and we're very excited to be able to share this moment with all of you. Our event tonight has sort of a blended audience. We have out-of-town guests who are here with us for the full sort of Centennial Symposium, which Paulina mentioned. So for those of you, welcome. And this conversation tonight is going to be sort of a warm-up for topics that we'll be discussing in greater depth tomorrow. And then we also have folks who are here with us just for this evening. We're thrilled to see you as well. And you'll have the opportunity to look closely with us at 6 paintings that chart Mitchell's career from the 1940s to the 1990s. And as we're looking at these works together, you'll be able to see these paintings as significant examples of Mitchell's practice, gain some skills in looking at Mitchell's paintings broadly, and also get a clearer sense of the contours of her career. So, for example, where she's working at various points in time, and what is driving the changes in the look of her paintings. But here's a warning, we are not going to be moving chronologically. We'll be jumping around. The best way that I can sort of describe the conversation's path is going to be from paintings that most of you are pretty familiar with to works that might be quite unfamiliar, and we'll go from the 1950s to the 80s to the 70s to the 60s to the 40s, and then conclude in the 90s. But before... Oh, and I'll just say that in each of these distinct historical moments, you will see Mitchell interrogating and expanding the possibilities of abstract painting, and doing so in some very daring ways. Daring in part because she's an artist who was never averse to beauty, even when that position could be misconstrued as being soft or anti-critical or too feminine, and also because Mitchell has always been committed to oil painting and to the idea of landscape, even when the art world around her was looking everywhere but at oil painting and landscape for advanced conversations. So I'm speaking here of the moments of pop art, minimal art, post-minimal art, conceptual art, etc. But before we get to our first painting, I said that this was the first public conversation that Sarah and I have had about Joan Mitchell. We have many conversations every week, sometimes daily, with Sarah and her colleagues at the Mitchell Foundation, especially the brilliant and indefatigable archivist Laura Morris. I don't know if Laura is here, but yeah, she deserves a special shout out too. But I thought I would take us back to our very first conversation about Mitchell. And this was 2 years ago when the Art Institute was really just beginning to consider the idea of doing a Joan Mitchell exhibition. And I was in San Francisco and invited Sarah for a coffee. And basically that conversation began with me saying, you know, you've just published this, co-edited this incredible book with Katie Siegel, organized a retrospective. You know, the retrospective and the catalog are so impressive. This is a 400-page book. I think we have 5 contributing catalog authors in the audience this evening. And yes, a round of applause for them too. So after publishing this and editing this defining text, my question to you was, did you leave anything for the rest of us? Was there anything that wasn't covered? And you know, as a good friend and also as a wonderful Mitchell scholar, you said that there were still bodies of work to be explored and still questions to be asked. But I do think that part of the work that we're doing now is digesting the incredible content of that catalog and the many topics that are published there that you and Katie brought to life so brilliantly. And at the Mitchell Centennial Gathering, we're going to be thinking about, what is the state of the question on Mitchell right now, especially as the Art Institute is looking toward an exhibition of Mitchell's work in 2030. And I'm about to wrap up these introductory remarks, but as a final introductory note, I would say that at this moment when Mitchell seems more multifaceted than ever, and we can think about her advancing conversations around painting in many different moments and collaborating with poets, musicians, artists of younger generations, there is also still this sense for me that there are maybe 3 fundamental places to look when you're thinking about Mitchell's paintings and sources for her work broadly. And one of those is the history of art that Mitchell has seen and studied. Mitchell is an unbelievable student of art history, and she began that practice here at the Art Institute of Chicago in the Impressionism galleries and the looking at the paintings that are there and also paintings that are in the modern wing on the 3rd floor. The painting that Mitchell was most passionate about was 19th and 20th century modernism, when color and mark are primary concerns, and where the mark has this twofold identity of being part of a picture, but also as a stroke that you can see as a distinct carrier of emotion. So that's source 1. Source 2 would be nature, and the types of heightened aesthetic emotional experience that you can have, let's say, outside of culture. I know that some might say that that's impossible to have an experience outside of culture, but I think that Mitchell believed that you could. And then a third place that we can always look at in Mitchell's paintings is the conversation that she's having with the surface of her work as she's making it, that immediate dialogue that's taking place stroke by stroke, responding to the artwork as it's in process. So with all of that being said, I'd like to ask you, Sarah, please, to start us off with our first painting, Roman numeral 1, City Landscape, an artwork made in 1955 in New York and acquired by the Art Institute in 1958. Yeah, so what do you see, Sarah, when you're looking at this?
Well, first,
painting?
I'm just going to say thank you to you and all of your colleagues here for collaboration on this event. It has been a real pleasure, and I look forward to continuing that as we work towards the exhibition. What I see when I look at this is Mitchell really coming into her own, which happened in 1954-55. She was in New York as of late 1949, dove right into the downtown painting scene. She was spending time with people like de Kooning and Klein and Guston. And she goes through a couple of really robust and interesting bodies of work. And in 1954-55, what kind of emerges is what we think of as Mitchell with all the kind of classic hallmarks. So it's a painting that has extraordinary and risk-taking color that very much continued throughout her career. It has the dynamic brushwork. It has brushwork that works both big and small, at a distance and close up. So if you're standing back from this, it works as a whole. There are brush marks that kind of sweep across the surface of the canvas. If you take the time to go up close, you'll find she's going back in very often with smaller brushes. She's reworking a texture. She's adding a squiggle. She's putting a little dollop of color within a brush stroke. That kind of attention to both the big and the small, the distance and the near, also is part of the sense of space. She has a very interwoven sense of space, and most of her paintings, I would say, space is complicated. It's something she thinks about a lot and plays with in a lot of different ways. It's also a painting that's quite interesting in how she's working with the frame and with the edges, and that's something that's always interesting to look at with Joan Mitchell, is how is she dealing with the corners. And then we should talk for a second about the title, because City Landscape points us to the real world. It points us to landscape, which was, as you said, central to the way she's thinking about abstraction. Obviously, it's not a representation of a landscape. It's an idea of a landscape. She liked to say it's the feeling of the landscape or the memory of a landscape. And that is a central just kind of pivot point all the way through her career. And it comes up, right here in the early 1950s.
Before we leave this slide, I also wanted to say about the surface of this work, it's such a full painting. There's so much color, there's so much density, but it's also, the impasto is not as heavy as you find in some later works.
Yes.
It's really quite thin in some ways, and when you do get up close, you'll start to see these very controlled drip passages too.
Yes.
And I just mentioned that because we're going to have a talk specifically about this tomorrow by Kim Muir and Katrina Rush. But you were saying, Sarah, that we've got city and landscape, a work made in New York, but maybe thinking back to Chicago and specifically the landscape of the Lake Michigan here.
So the lake is, a point of reference that she begins talking about in the early 1950s, and it really continues through her entire career. It's her whole idea of landscape, I think, was informed by her growing up looking out at Lake Michigan. The weather and the shifting light. Landscape for Mitchell is not a particular view at a particular moment. It's kind of an unstable concept. It changes over time. It changes with the time of day. It changes with what you're feeling. And it's a sort of a whole body, multi-sensory experience. And that is absolutely rooted in Lake Michigan and her experiences here.
Right. And so the landscape here, but also the tradition of landscape painting that she saw in the Art Institute galleries,
absolutely.
And sort of blending those together, and a type of really a symbol for her that becomes quite core.
Yes.
Also at this time, and I'll advance this, there's the first real critical writing on Mitchell, sort of the vocabulary that will come back again and again. I don't know if you want to say maybe a word
Sure.
about
I mean, this is an
Sandler.
article that came out in 1957. By 1957, she's really being recognized nationally. There's an article in Life magazine. There's this profile of her in Art News. Joan Mitchell paints a picture. And a lot of the framework that has stuck really in how we talk and think about Mitchell's work lands in this article in 1957. And there's one particular phrase. She says, "I carry my landscapes around with me." And it points to that these are not necessarily real places. They're ideas. They're internal.
Yeah. So it's around the time that this article is published that Mitchell has two really important museum acquisitions, one of them being City Landscape at the Art Institute, acquired through the Society for Contemporary Art, and then also Hemlock at the Whitney. Yeah. We have a couple other comp ills. Maybe we'll just move forward. I thought it could be interesting for people here who know City Landscape, the Art Institute City Landscape so thoroughly, to see that this is a title that's used for several compositions. And then to your point about the landscape being a memory of the lake, we have the lake too.
And there are paintings titled The Lake, and she continues to talk about Lake Michigan up until the end of her life.
Yeah. Do you want to talk, Sarah, at all about just some of those framing corners again? Another word about those?
Yeah, I mean, she's always, in this time period, there is very often kind of a central mass that sort of comes together as a center of gravity. We'll see later some of the paintings that she did very early in her life that were really looking closely at Cubism. And I think the way she's dividing up the canvas in a series of blocks and cubes and shapes at this point is still informed by that early looking at Cubism.
Yeah. Well, there is this coagulation of all of these strokes in the center. And if this is a landscape, for me, these paintings and also the Art Institute City Landscape, there is a sense of symmetry that's top and bottom, and maybe looking at a reflection.
Or foreground, middle ground, background.
Yes. Yeah. That you can, your eye can sort of move through the painting in a way that would be like looking at a more traditional landscape of a body of water, potentially. Okay, anything else on City Landscape?
No.
Okay.
We covered it. Let's move on to Edrita Fried, painting from 1981, which you came to New York to see and specifically requested. So what did you take away from the viewing?
That it's an incredible painting. That I guess what I'll say first is this was one of the paintings that I specifically requested to see. Thank you for facilitating that viewing. Because I'm very interested in the multi-panel paintings. Those will be an emphasis of the Art Institute's exhibition. And as we'll see in this talk, there are many strategies that Mitchell uses in multi-panel compositions. Edrita Fried is such a significant painting, and you can tell that by the scale of the work, by its important exhibition history too, but also because the fact that it is dedicated to Edrita Fried, who was such an important figure in Mitchell's life. So for those of you who aren't aware of who Edrita Fried is, she was a psychoanalyst born in Vienna who emigrated to New York City in 1938. Mitchell starts seeing Edrita Fried in 1951 during a very tumultuous moment in her life, seeing her for sessions even 3 times a week. And that relationship continues until...
For decades.
For decades, until Edrita Fried's death in November of 1981. So this is one of several late multi-panel canvases where Mitchell is dealing with loss. She also makes paintings around this time dealing with the death of Thomas Hess. She also loses her sister, Sally, around this time too. But I think in the moment of viewing, and the thing that I really took away was an appreciation for the orchestration of color and the way that orange blaze travels from panel 2 to panel 4 and grows. and also this sense that, while this is an homage to an important person, there are also some conventions of landscape here, too. So these very sort of small strokes that you see at the bottom of the panels, and then larger strokes moving up, your eye moves from bottom to top, as you would travel through a landscape. And I also just love this moment of Mitchell's career for the type of mark making that she's doing, this large brush where you can really see sort of line that is sort of folded over onto itself to become planar, sort of holding a form,
line
holding
used
an
as
era.
form.
Yeah, exactly. And just the gesture, the activity of the stroke, it's just so satisfying to look at. So those are some of the reasons that I wanted to look at this. And as you'll see here, this is a work that is made in Vatoy, and we have a slide of Mitchell on her property, which is in the heart of Impressionism country. And it was interesting, of course, also to begin thinking about the fact that potentially the first place where Mitchell engages with Vatoy as a place is in Monet's work in the collection of the Art Institute, that she would have seen these two paintings that come into the collection in 1933, one showing Vatoy at around noontime and the other sort of more of a sunset depiction of the same site. And this picture of Mitchell, she's standing just off canvas to the left.
Yes.
Her house is really, it
up on the hill.
Up on the hill. It is so this is, I was thinking about this place too, and Mitchell working here, and looking at Edrita Fried. And I was also interested in the fact that, somewhat paradoxically, this painting makes its first public appearance in the 1983.
Second public appearance, because it was in the Paris show. Right.
Oh, it was in the Paris show, too. It makes its first public appearance in the United
US,
States,
yes.
At the Whitney Biennial in 1983, which is such
very strange,
a contradictory context in which to think about Mitchell working. And we spoke a little bit about her commitment to oil painting, and I don't know, today we use this phrase, fear of missing out. I don't get the sense that Mitchell had any fear of missing out on the other things that were taking place in
Never.
this. There was a relief of missing out and being able to really think about oil painting in a sustained, serious way.
Yeah, I mean, it is, if you flip through the catalog, it jumps out at you as just a complete anomaly as to why is this painting in this show. Yeah. And I spend a little time reading back through the introduction to see if there are any clues. And there's a phrase in there, it says, that looking at the most exciting emerging artists and major developments, or exciting developments from major figures. And I thought, okay, maybe that was the phrase that kind of got Mitchell in the
Mitchell
door.
Fits in.
And I would love to speak to one of the curators and ask why.
We could ask Barbara Haskell.
Yeah, we could ask Barbara Haskell, why is this painting in the show? And it was shown actually in a gallery with Nancy Graves, which is kind of an interesting juxtaposition and maybe explains a little bit, thinking about abstraction and nature.
So we have just a couple other sort of comparative illustrations. I'll mention that tomorrow, Amanda Williams' presentation will engage with the painting of Edrita Fried. I think, Sarah, we included this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word because we're both fascinated by the multi-panel approach, and it extends into the drawings, and you see it being everything from, kind of a series. Maybe this is looking at different times of day or different states of mind. But there's, sometimes there's a progression, sometimes there's a bouncing back and forth, sometimes there's a mirroring or almost like, a bookend effect that she's doing with the multi-panels. Julie Meritu referred to them as having pagination, which I think is
that's a nice term.
A great term to think about, particularly given Mitchell's deep love of books and reading. But it's, that is a subject that I could go on about for a very long time. So we can keep going on.
Okay.
To another multi-panel painting, actually, Preface for Chris, which I will confess, when you said you wanted to talk about this one, I sort of scratched my head. So let's hear it. Why are we talking about this one?
I wanted to look at this because it was a painting that I spent some time with over the summer. Rachel Cohen and I were Mitchell travel buddies, and basically, if there's a Joan Mitchell painting within a 4-mile driving radius, I want to go see it. And so we went up to Cranbrook to look at this painting, and it was a work that I hadn't seen before, but I knew that it had been included in the 1974 exhibition of Mitchell's work at the Whitney that Marcia Tucker had curated. And I'll admit that when I started thinking about Mitchell's paintings, works from this moment were the most challenging for me because there's really no hierarchy within of where to look. It's even challenging. I was going to say there's no hierarchy within the composition. It's maybe challenging even to refer to composition as something that is motivating a work like this. And what I recall from the viewing was, you have an entirely different strategy here of working with multi-panels. But I became fascinated with the way that different colors were responding to each other. And these larger areas, these sort of fields of color, these block forms, how Mitchell is using those to create this picture. And again, in the title, Preface for Chris, we have another literary reference.
Yes.
This is something that Rachel is going to be talking about in her paper tomorrow. A young poet who was spending time with Mitchell, Chris Larson. So I guess I'll say two more things about this. One is my interest in it was that it was included in the Marcia Tucker exhibition, which generates some very fascinating critical responses. So that show, has a great essay by Tucker herself, but it prompted a review from Harold Rosenberg in The New Yorker, where he talks about this as a real extension of abstract expressionist practice, and really Mitchell now employing some of the theories of push-pull and Hans Hofmann. Mm-hmm. And it also generates a review by Rosalind Krauss in Art Forum, where she's thinking about this as almost a near continuous extension of Impressionism. But she also has some in my opinion, strange things to say about the scale of the work and how that's working. She describes it as a type of a cyclorama, this 19th century amusement, and that the scale is really
a problem. I mean, she sees it as a problem.
Exactly.
Which is, it's a very strange review, that review.
Yeah.
I think the reviews in general were really grappling with how to think about Mitchell at that moment. I mean, she had kind of had a disappearance almost from New York City. And there's some people talking about, there's painterly painting coming back. Maybe we should think about her as a forebear for that. Marcia Tucker, of course, very feminist activist curator, and perhaps seeing Mitchell as someone to be put out as an example of for younger painters to be turning to. Yes. But a lot of none of the criticism really picked up on that. No. It was much more about, is she still Ab-X? Do we call this Ab-X anymore? What do we think about gestural oil painting in the 1970s, which was just such an anomaly?
Yes, right. And of course, Tucker is saying this is entirely new. This is a fresh chapter for Mitchell.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and I'll guess if Cora is here, Cora Chalabi will be speaking about some of these issues in her talk tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But just one last thing that I'll say about this this work is that just how I had an understanding in looking at it of the durational aspect of Mitchell's painting, and that it can sometimes take 20 minutes for the emotional effect of, some of passages like this, that there are different colors there.
Yeah, it takes a while for your eye to adjust enough to pick up the subtlety. And of course, you can't see it at all on the screen here.
Right.
But if you spend some time with paintings like this, there are very often very slight differences in shades of yellow
Yes.
or grays or blues that don't emerge until you spend a long time looking.
Yes, and it was also this sort of terrifying realization that as a curator, you have to pick a wall color.
Yes, you do.
It's going to, yes.
Yes, you do.
So I'll be asking you and Katie for
Yes.
tips on that. But when looking at a painting like this, there might be a sense of, what is the engine? What is the motivation? How is Mitchell making choices? And it's interesting to look at works on paper that she's making roughly contemporaneously, these pastel poems. Do you want to say a word about them?
She described as using other people's words to help her kind of find a way into working. She had a little bit of a down period or a blockage and hadn't been working much. And had another young poet, J.J. Mitchell, staying with her. She very often brought younger artists, poets, musicians to stay for days or weeks or months at a time in her home in Vitoy. And she loved the energy and the kind of dialogue. And so J.J. Mitchell wrote these poems. They're typed on the page, and then she's pasteling around them. And she talked about it being a good way to kind of get her going and responding to words. Yes. Poetry was central for her all the way through. She was, her mother was a poet and editor of Poetry Magazine here in Chicago, and she read poetry and was friends with poets throughout her life.
And we'll be talking about that tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I want to move to Painting 4, Blue Tree, 1964.
Yes.
This was your selection, Sarah.
It is.
Will you tell us why you chose this? Yes.
Well, I'm very embedded in the 1960 to 64 period, or 65 period right now. We're opening an exhibition at David's Werner Gallery in New York, November 6th, so installing starting next week, that's focused on this time period, and it's one that I wrote about in the book, and it continues to just, enthrall me in various ways. It's a period where she is really moving away from the beautiful and kind of exploring disharmonious color, textures that can be a little tough, or even in some paintings scatological. And it's a period where she's responding to the landscape, a very specific landscape. She's spending time on a sailboat. I think we have a picture of the sailboat. In the Mediterranean, kind of based on the Côte d'Azur, but traveling on the boat to Corsica and Italy and Greece. Lots of time out on the open water, but also lots of time moored in places like you see on the right here, up against rocky limestone cliffs with scrubby vegetation and cypress trees. And she makes a whole group of works that are thinking about trees and actually have tree in the title. She acknowledges the, kind of the direct reference, pushing off from a very particular moment when she saw a cypress tree. So again, this memory, sense, feeling relationship with landscape, but they're not direct representational references in any way, shape, or form. And it's also a moment, I think, where she is kind of facing what it means to be making oil paintings in the 1960s. She's very aware of what's happening in New York and in Paris. She's going back and forth. In Paris, there has been a whole decade of painters very interested in the physicality of oil paint, the material itself. But in New York, pop art is in full swing. Minimalism is, also in full swing. 1964 is when Rauschenberg wins the big prize at the Venice Biennale and causes this huge scandal. And oil painting is not part of any of those conversations, and particularly gestural, meaty, juicy oil painting is not part of any of those conversations. And in a sense, she doubles down. I mean, she decides at this moment to, go even juicier. And so it's, in a way, it's where she's really just declaring her own path. And these are going to be extremely hard to hang on a white wall, by the way. I'm very concerned. But there is an extraordinary body of work.
Yes, and interesting to see for a painting as challenging as this, it is also acquired by a museum the year after it's made. So
Yes, exactly. And I don't know the story behind that acquisition. I would love to. Maybe they acquired it out of that Stable Gallery exhibition. They've been working on it, doing some conservation, really advanced, interesting conservation treatment on it, which is they've published a little bit about on their website. It's quite interesting.
Okay, great. Well, we're looking forward to your exhibition opening on
November 6th,
6th.
yes, through the 13th of December.
Yeah.
If you're in New York. There she is on the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next painting again that we have is Billiards from 1949, which was one of your picks. And I know you're thinking about painting issues with this one.
I'm fascinated by these pictures that Mitchell makes in the 40s, rarely exhibited. I think these are, as we said, we're getting into works that are less well known now. But there's still a figural presence in this painting. Billiards, painting people playing billiards, that's kind of a classic subject of paintings. I mean, often there's sort of a sense of depicting a social gathering, if you will, but there's also a real potential to get into formal issues because the pool table is a plane and you also have the balls, which are like points, and you have the cues that are lines. And so I think you see Mitchell here working through those formal issues in
building blocks,
yes, and in a sort of a cubist type of space. And you have figures playing, but they're in the process of becoming almost transparent. So that was of interest to me, and also the sense of speed in this painting. It's really quick. There's a real sort of rapidity to the movement that I like a lot. In addition to the color palette and so many other great things. Do you want to, before we move off of this slide, Sarah, do you want to talk about why the tacking margin looks the way it does?
Sure. So, I mean, you can see on the slide, it mentions it was shown in 1950 at the St. Paul Gallery and School of Art, which was one of her very first solo exhibitions. And then the likely scenario is that it was taken off the stretcher just to make it easier to store. And whether that happened right after that or in the 60s, Mitchell came back to Chicago to clean out her parents' house. Both of her parents had passed away. Her mom, the second to die in 1966, and she came back. And there was a lot of work that had to be shipped, and rolling it and shipping it that way is more compact and more efficient. So it was popped out, taken off the stretcher and rolled.
Yeah. So in looking at this, I started thinking a little bit more about Mitchell's source materials and paintings that she could have seen that might have prompted her to make a painting that has this type of look. And when we are thinking about the latter portions of Mitchell's career, we have some very handy depictions of, sort of an inspiration board, which you see on the right here with, a Seurat drawing and de Kooning and Cezanne and Van Gogh and Klein and some of Mitchell's own works and some
Peanuts cartoons, I think.
Peanuts cartoons and a Roman mosaic and a Byzantine mosaic. So all of those. But with what Mitchell was seeing in the 40s, that really takes us to Chicago. And for Cubist paintings that would have been available for Mitchell to see, we could think both about the Picasso Head of a Woman, that's here in 1940, and the portrait of Daniel Henry Kahnweiler is acquired by the museum in 1948, but it's in the city long before that. I mean, these are paintings that Mitchell saw, I believe, in 1938. I'm interested in engaging more in the ways that paintings that are here factor into her thinking about making a picture in pictorial space. There's another work from the 40s that I like a great deal that also has a clear connection to Cubism, and that's Figure in the City, which you and Katie included in the retrospective. I think you had to stretch it again, right?
Yes, yeah. The foundation very kindly had it conserved and stretched up for us. And it feels like a pivot point, and she spoke about it as the last figurative painting that she would ever make. And she had a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Cubism. She talked about never having been interested in Picasso, but we're seeing, I think, the evidence that she was, like every art student in the late 40s, grappling with Picasso.
Yeah, and of course we've got this sense of a figure here, which might be a self-portrait. There's a photograph of Mitchell and her father with this painting in their home
Hanging
in Chicago, and she's sort of taking the posture of that figure in the foreground, but then also the sense of the city, which maybe brings us back to city landscape and those types of questions and topics. But so all of these sort of small factors in the surface, of course, are speaking to Cubism, but the palette here with these teals and blues, I think also is speaking to a great interest in Matisse and works also that Mitchell would have been seeing.
Yeah, one of the other cornerstone figures for her. Right. She spent a lot of time with here as a child and a student.
Right. Yeah. Figure the woman before an aquarium, the patterning, the tile that's behind her, I think is maybe evoked a little bit, possibly anyway, in the backdrop of the figure in the city, as well as just the sort of the glorious luminous palette that Matisse uses.
Interestingly, the sense of space too.
And the sense of
space.
At it. Yeah, definitely. But I might venture to say that the figure who loomed largest in Mitchell's mind at this point in time was actually Van Gogh. And this painting has been at the Art Institute since 26. We know that Mitchell saw this very early on. And, something like the Poet's Garden. So these works are going to be our transition to the last painting that we'll be speaking about before Q&A. And it is a work that is very much indebted to Van Gogh, although you might not think that when you first see it. Would you like to tell us why? Well,
sunflowers, obviously. So the Van Gogh sunflowers were, a lifelong fascination and point of reference for Mitchell. In her painting, she talked about the fact that the sunflower has this full life cycle, and she liked thinking about the sunflower when it was dying as much as when it was fresh and new. This is painted in the last year of her life.
Yes.
It brings to mind all kinds of questions about, the late work, the late stages of her painting. She much more openly acknowledged her debt to Van Gogh, her points of reference in nature, and just in the last few years of her life. You can see her kind of ranging back through her own work and thinking about reconciling with it, revisiting some of it. She also revisits, as this sunflower painting from 1969, she also directly takes on and makes paintings that are based in and thinking through Van Gogh and Cézanne paintings in this time period. It's a really rich moment. She talks about, she was at this point physically challenging for her to get to the studio, to get up on the ladder to paint. One of my favorite Joan Mitchell quotes is somebody asked her, how do you do this when you can barely walk? And she says, I just got up on that effing ladder and made it work,
Yes.
And, every stroke counted, because literally every painting that she was making at this moment might be her last. And you see that there's a sort of precision and a cumulative knowledge that's coming through in every brush stroke that she's making in these last paintings. There's a great quote by Tom Hess talking about late de Kooning, that the brain of the painter lives in the hand, and the decades and decades and decades of applying the brush and knowing the color, knowing the speed of the paint at a particular viscosity, all comes through.
Right. I'm also just thinking, we've talked about these multi-panel compositions as having a few different types, and this is a pretty clear mirroring example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I'm also thinking, I'm just, sorry, I've got de Kooning on the brain now, but I'm also reminded of his, he says something about taking a walk in your own landscape, that walk, painting late in life is like taking a walk in your own landscape. And I think that's such a lovely idea to apply to Mitchell as well, that she is looking back through all of her own paintings. She's pulling new ideas. She's revisiting old ideas and revisiting her landscape.
Right. Yeah, and of course, at her home at Vatoy, Mitchell had sunflowers growing, so there's the sense of actual landscape and the life cycle of the flowers, but then also, as you were saying, revisiting her own work, painting sunflowers at earlier moments in her career, and then going back to Van Gogh, and it really is sort of building and building and building until these great late paintings. And I, as you're saying, I especially love Mitchell's work of the 80s and the 90s because I think she's reinvented her practice several times over and really finding a definition of painting where painting is what she does best, and it's color and mark and scale and emotion, and they're so powerful. So.
Yeah, when I was kind of going back through these late works and thinking about, preparing for this, it also struck me, I've never thought about Mitchell in relation to the idea of the sublime before. And as someone who's worked on this exhibition, American Sublime, and thought a lot about the idea of the sublime, there is this, this knife edge balance of the beauty and the mortality, the death and the tragedy that kind of runs underneath a lot of the paintings, that makes me wonder if maybe we shouldn't think a little bit about that application of the term.
That's very provocative. Yes, and also just to say, this work is on view not so far away right now. This is in St. Louis right now.
Yes, so. And I think, Katie, you just talked about it yesterday or something, right?
I think the last sort of comparative image that we have is this late pastel, also the last year of Mitchell's life, and really the same day that I was looking at the Edrita Fried painting, I was interested in these pastels and thinking about the way that the two forms were relating to each other, responding to each other, and was fascinated to learn that these were drawings that she created to make a jacket for a book, so that the little markings that you're seeing on this sheet, like here's the book's spine and the front cover and the back cover, but laid out as a sheet. You have a really interesting sense of how these two forms can talk to each other.
Another kind of diptych.
Another type of diptych.
And another pagination.
Yeah.
And so spare. These drawings are just the economy of line are incredible. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.